Welcome back to the Inorganic Podcast. My name's Christian Hassold. I'm your host. This is episode 25. In this episode, we're going to talk about organic sourcing with my friend Ayelet. Ayelet is a trained psychologist who went into sales and then went into corp dev. She's built a playbook for success on like how you get those first two calls done right. You get all the right information, you build the right rapport, and you quickly qualify or disqualify whether you should move the prospect into the funnel. So maybe you could just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you're at today, and how you got into the corporate development game.
Absolutely. So, today I am currently the head of corporate development and deal management for Speed M&A by Jones-Spross, but I'll explain more about that. Originally, before this whole business world, I was supposed to be a therapist. I thought I was going to be a therapist my whole life. Got my undergrad in psychology, went and got my master's in clinical social work. Halfway through my master's degree, I was going to a conference, like an entrepreneurial conference with my dad. And it happened to be the week after they told me what my starting salary would be for a, starting therapist with their master's coming from NYU. And it was $45,000 a year. This was, it would be post 2 degrees.
Yeah.
And I said, I live in Manhattan. I don't think that's even going to really cover my rent. And I started to think. I go to this entrepreneurial conference, my mind gets opened up and I start to think, okay, there has to be something I can do with my talents that I have as a therapist, because I was going to finish my master's and I did, that utilizes the same skill set, but has me get a different outcome, and maybe a different career path. And then I started saying, okay, well, what's the best way to get to that? Start asking all of these people now in your network, which was from this conference, all of the biggest problems in their business. So I said, what's your biggest problem? What's yours? And every time they said sales, business development. And I said, I could probably do that. The whole thing in sales is you want to get someone to a certain outcome, and that's what therapists do. And they just do it by asking you a bunch of questions. So let me use my methodologies to be able to do that. So I said, just give me your leads. And I started closing them. And I realized that I was better at closing their leads in very high ticket sales than they were as founders, owners, CEOs of these, agencies, coaches, etc. So I ended up realizing, well, this is something bigger than this. Then I started creating the sales process and systems and growing their teams, and pretty much creating an agency around it. Had a bunch of clients, ended up doing this at one point for, I was doing this with Scalable, Roland Frazier, Ryan Dice. One of Roland's programs was M&A. And so I was kind of redoing this whole selling this M&A education program. And I ended up getting, approached by an agency aggregator at the time. And they said, when are you going to stop? One of the co-founders said, when are you going to stop selling M&A and just start doing it? And I said, sounds about right. Same skill set. So I ended up getting recruited into this agency aggregator, became an M&A associate, became the director of M&A for that aggregator at the time, buying digital marketing agencies. Then I came to a point in time where I was ready to touch different deal sizes, different industries. And I, went to, our firm, our aggregator's then lawyer at the time, because she does 80 to 100 deals a year. And I said, who should I go talk to? What private equity group should I go talk to? All of this. And she said, I have a better idea. Come work for me, be the head of corporate development and create this deal management role and build a team out for the firm. And then you can also go and do corp dev for our clients, because they're all buyers and sellers, within all types of verticals, largely, serial acquirers. And I said, great. And that's how I got into this world. And, from being a therapist to now this.
That's amazing. Psychology as a background, sales as a background, like all of those things. What's funny? I have a lot of friends who went to very good schools like you did. They were the rule followers, if you will. They got good grades in school, and they were like, if I get good grades in school, then I'll get into a good college. And if I get into a good college, then I can go out and have wealth creation and live a great life and buy a house. In between the time that storytelling occurs, for me, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, where I think the bar was a different level of a bar. It was pre-Silicon Valley, pre a lot of foreign money coming into the United States. Like what it meant to be 0.01% in 1985 versus what it is in 05 or versus 15 versus now, like starkly different. And so it just raised the cost of living in general. So like it made it hard to do jobs that had a really fixed income schedule, like you're talking about. Doing therapy, psychology can be like 50 or 100 depending on what you're doing and where you're doing it. But you're also very limited in your opportunity. And like for some people, it's great. Like it's the opportunity to help other people that really drives and motivates them. And maybe for whatever reason, like they can figure out how to live. But for others, it's like, well, I want to make money and have fun. Like, how do I do both? So let's start at the top, Ayelet. You can build funnel one of two ways: from banker sourced inbounds, where they're bringing you opportunities that are actively actionable and coming to market, or you can build your own organic pipeline by doing outbound. Banker sourced leads are great because they're actionable, they're qualified, all the information's super clean, everything you need is right there. With organic sourcing, you have to do all that work yourself, and you have to, when you're doing organic sourcing, actionability is harder to go find. So you have to have a lot of calls. You have to get to a lot of people to find those very specific actionable opportunities that you want. And so it comes down to figuring out how to quickly get to know, how to quickly figure out if the seller that you're talking to, the potential seller, the prospect is actionable, is right fit for the criteria. Like how do you kind of get to the know the fastest? So I'd love to hear your thought and process for how you approach call one and call two in getting to identify whether that prospect is a prospect you should carry through the next steps of the funnel. So let's start there.
Well, when you do a process, it's the same thing with any campaign you're going to run, in, let's say, if you're in an agency, whatnot, right? And so you're qualifying a list, so to say, right? And so you can use whatever methodologies you want to create that list. And there's tons of, platforms out there right now. We've used Source Scrub in the past and whatever to get to that outreach. So I just want to clarify that I think you're saying like from the time that we get on this first call, right?
Yeah.
So when we get on this first call, 30 minutes flat. That's what I want. It is a quick, I am going to say, yes, I want to start to get into something a little bit deeper. Do we have something here? But really all I want to know on the first call is where, and the same thing in sales, right? Where they are right now, where do they want to be? And can my solution, right, me acquiring them as the buyer, be the gap in between? And can we actually get there, right? No fluff, right? So I'm asking the questions of where they are, where are they in their business right now? What is their pain is also the biggest point. They are looking to get acquired for a reason. What is that real reason? Something, we said that, okay, the background in sales is really important. I actually think the background in psychology was more important because it was all about asking the right questions, letting people talk. My favorite line that I constantly say is, they say, I've been in this for a long time. I'm ready to take the kind of the next step for me, maybe create some liquidity for my family. I say, tell me more about that. Tell me more is the constant thing that I will say in every conversation because they keep talking without me prompting them for a response that they think I want. But I am trying to get to what is that pain for them, especially if I know that they might not be getting this like massive cash outlay if they're in that, only a few million in EBITDA, right? And so they might not be getting this life-changing money. As we said, money, the concept of money has really changed over time. And so I want to know what that pain is and if I can actually solve it, especially if I'm going to be doing a different kind of creative deal structure. They might not be getting as much cash on close, right? They're going to be going into a longer earnout. I really want to know what are the things that I could potentially solve and if it's going to get there. Now, by the end of that first conversation, it is not for me about selling because at the end of the day, they likely want to sell their business. That is kind of the hope for them. It's only if we can actually give them what they want in it. So it's figuring out a lot about them in that first 30-minute conversation. I do very little on education and the sales process in that conversation, and it's largely about them in that first one, because I want to know in my next decision, because my next call is going to be a longer call and I'm going to have an NDA signed to get into the nitty gritty. Do we actually even want to get there? And that's the only thing I'm trying to get to in that first 30 minutes. Where I'm trying to get to on the no, I'm going to get to a no is the second call. That's where I'm really hitting at the no.
Got it. All right. So call number one, you're really trying to understand them and their intrinsic motivations.
Yeah. And where the business is.
And where the state of their business is. Is there a disqualifying question or questions in call one that you explicitly put out to get ahead of things that might make you say, I don't want to go past call one? Like, what is the way you decide you want to spend another 30 or 40 minutes on the next call?
What's your ultimate, what would your dream, scenario with an exit potentially look like? Or what do you think is ideal and what you would want? And if they say, what are the
kind of answers you get where they say like,
I want a 12x multiple on a $1 million agency in revenue. Literally. I've, had conversations with agencies that are doing about, maybe even 1 million in EBITDA, and they'll say, I won't settle for anything less than a 13x multiple with a 80% cash on close. And if that's the answer, I'm like, that's awesome, right? That you want that. We have two options here. Either you go and do your thing and grow that agency to the point that you're going to be getting a multiple of that.
Yeah.
Or we go and, talk through what we're actually seeing in the market and if that's even open to you. But we're not gonna be your ideal buyer if that's actually the case right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. So you kind of like run towards at the first call, like, just roughly, what are your expectations? So you're having expectations in the first call. You're talking about like, what are your expectations?
Yeah. If the stars were to align and the right buyer comes along for you, what does that look like?
Now, I find a lot of it, we have, your background is principally around acquiring agencies, and that's newer. I'm newer to that world. More of my experience is in software, and there are similarities. There are definitely similarities. One of the common threads is, what do you think I'm worth?
Yeah, that's always the question that you're going to get to. Some will ask it, some won't, depending on the founder in that first 30 minutes. It's different if you're sitting at a dinner for 3 hours. And I always say, it's really irresponsible of me to just tell you what you're worth without me having any knowledge, and deeper understanding of the business, because multiples vary.
Yeah.
I would just feel like it's extremely irresponsible of me to just give you an answer.
Do you ever come out and just say like, hey, look, just to be clear, the market on the low end for your business could be 5x, depending on where your financials are, could be 10x. We're not a 10x buyer, just so you know. We're more like a 5 to 7x buyer. Like, do you ever have that kind of direct discussion about generally where you live, almost to sort of frighten them away from like being like, oh, because I've encountered a lot of prospects in my life who are intentionally vague because they're not sure, and because they're trying not to scare me away. So someone has to try and draw someone in or scare them away, right?
Yeah. No, I will always give them a sense of, I will say, here's what here's where the multiples are in the market. Yeah. And I say, we are not that, right? Just like you said, we are not going to be, potentially the top buyer, the top 10x buyer, 12x, 15x buyer for you. If that's the most important thing to you, I think we should, move on from the conversation. But I always I like to point things back to someone else. I say, it's about what you want, right? If that is the most important thing for you and what you're looking for, we're not going to be the right buyer for you.
All right. So first call, you've basically qualified what are their intrinsic motivations and are their expectations reasonable enough that it makes sense to spend time on it. So then you get to the second call. What's the second call?
So at this point, at the end of that first call, I'll say, okay, and I start to outline the steps. I feed in little education pieces along the way. Then, this is the early phase, right? This is the feel good part of things where things are a little bit easy.
Yeah.
The next thing that we like to do is we want to sign we want to sign a mutual NDA. We want to spend about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes on a call together to kind of dive into the nitty gritty of the business and what's really going on in it and some of the little intricacies that are going on. And I'll tell you more about us and what we're doing in our process and how it really runs with us. Does that make sense? And so this next call is going to be that hour, could be an hour and a half conversation to go into all of the qualifying questions that I really need to know if I am genuinely going to spend time and money on getting into this business. Because this is the conversation that I am trying to get to that now, right? So, whatever your investment criteria are the things that I want to know. But it's much better to hear it from their mouth because I can go and ask further questions, right? I can say, okay, here's the challenge that you're having right now in growth, right? Tell me more about that. What do you think can solve it? Because that's where I'm going to start to see if, our strategy can genuinely solve that or if it makes sense and it starts to fit. And then I'm going to start to also ask questions about their future and what they're really looking for and what they want and kind of the disqualifying factors for them. Because that's going to then frame how I then start to educate on our story. So this hour and a half conversation can get you tons and tons of information after we signed an NDA, before I've seen physical financials, balance sheets, anything. But it's going to get me to, but what I say at the end of this call is, I prompt this at the beginning. At the end of this call, we both want to be at the same level of excitement. Because if we're not both there, what's going to happen is this process is really just going to fizzle out. And what I don't want to do is, once we move past this, that's when I start to educate too. We start moving into pre-due diligence and we're going to start collecting information. Our team is going to start to spend time on that. Your team is going to start to, have to collect all of this information and clean it up and do all of these things. And time is money at the end of the day. And so we both want to be at that same level of excitement to really be able to move forward. So be transparent with me throughout this entire process because it really sucks when we continuously move forward and then we get to the end of a process and it just isn't working. This is when I'm trying to get to that now.
Yeah, got it. So call one or call two, understand the business in advance of getting the information. And the problems that we're starting to try to solve here is you can spend a lot of time getting to know them, gathering information and doing all this kind of deep dive work. But what you really want to do is kind of get a sense from them, where the business is. To what degree do you find that their description of the business that you uncover on that hour-long call matches with the materials that they share? What's the frequency? Because I've had experiences where they're super clear about what's going on. I have a highly concentrated customer base. I have 2 really large customers that are 60% of my revenue. And then I have 4 or 5 other customers that are kind of the balance. I had a meeting actually with a founder, first meeting with him where he invited me to his office in New York. We sat down, we talked about his business, and he told me that his MRR was a particular number. It worked out that his MRR was actually his ARR, his annual number. And I mean, everything he had shown me at that point was everything he had said and everything he described and shown me kind of all added up. But then when I looked at it, I was this is literally the opposite of what it got. So how frequently do you find that potential sellers or prospects are connected to what is actually factually happening behind the scenes?
It splits, right? This is when the specificity around your questions matters the most, and understanding like is the CEO founder just not really sophisticated in what they're saying? Do they not understand your questions, or is this just like a blatant weird situation where they're just not telling me the truth? So that's when, on that hour and a half call, I'm asking the specifics, and like, this is obviously industry dependent. You're knowing the specifics of what you're asking, right?
Yeah.
So, go like really getting down to those granular questions helps you to say, okay, well, I heard you just, you just said this, what I heard prior, and I'm like typing notes as I'm doing all of this too. So I can look back as I'm hearing this. To help me figure out, is there a gap that we're missing here? Because you're saying, your margins are this right now, but you're telling me that your EBITDA is this right now. Yeah. So help me understand where this gap is, right? If you're saying your ARR is this, but your MRR is this, but that's really your ARR, help me understand. And I'm asking those nitty gritty questions as we're getting there. It splits, it's also a read on the person. Yeah. I tend to have a good beat on the person. And if I know that the financials are going to match up with what they're saying, and I take it all with a grain of salt. So sometimes I'll actually move through, if I'm like, this company seems very interesting to me, I'll actually move through that call even quicker. Still like being transparent. I'm not selling anything, right? And I'm not trying to get to a yes so that I can just get all of their financials. But I want to take a look at that, and I'm not going to have my team dive as deep if I know that, I can be taking a look to just see if we're starting to match up in the beginning.
Okay, so you get through this call, you basically are going through the verbal overlay deep dive with the founder in 1 hour. What is like what are like the thing that makes you say, I want to continue to the next step, or like bottom line, I want to continue, or we're breaking up?
Well, I think that heavily depends on like where I am as the buyer, right? Like, and what is my investment criteria right now? If I am just looking for a bolt-on, do they fit that, right? Like, what is my investment criteria, and do they actually match that, right? If I'm looking for the service capability, does it actually match? Well, then I know in my head, maybe the finance, as long as, they're not completely running in the red, right? If that's not so important to me, then if they're filling that service capability and their quality of work is there, right, and the quality of their product is there, okay, like that's what I really need to know to get the information from. If it's, this is going to be a platform, the revenue, the EBITDA, it really matters for me. And then, the multiple matters for them. I need to get to that information. So it's really dependent on what I am trying to get as the buyer. Those are going to be like the disqualifiers.
Got it. So we're like turning it around for the audience. Kind of what you're saying is, look, the qualifying or disqualifying questions are wrapped a little bit around, are you a platform trying to do a roll up on which like economics matters a lot, because you're probably financing, the deal. And so you need EBITDA and margins to be a particular way, and you want it to be accretive to the business. Another way is like, the EBITDA matters because I need to ultimately pay for this, but the capabilities really matter more. And if the capabilities are there, but the financials are kind of like question mark, I might still want to proceed because if the capabilities are like a solid match, and I'm just like, I'm 50-50 on the financials, I still might want to spend a little bit more time because I'm trying to patch a capability challenge. Is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I do a deal sourcing talk at conferences, and like the question I always say is like, figure out what you're trying to accomplish from this acquisition that you're trying to do, right? When you're running this process. Yeah. And you need to know in your investment criteria and what really matters to you, and you rank it, right? Highest to lowest. Like, I have a go, no go for every process of the deal, for every step in the deal process, and for every like deal specific or outreach specific platform, add-on, bolt-on, whatnot. And I'm saying, here's my go, no goes, right? Write it down in advance. Here's my green, here's my yellow, here's my red. Do
you scorecard it? Do you use a scoring system? Is it like scale of 1 to 5? Is like, how do you do it?
1 to 5. Yeah. 1 to 5. And then you'll have your, red flag. you'll have your red flags in there, and you need to know what are the red flags that will override the we continue or we don't continue.
Do you purposely constrain your criteria to like keep it simple? Is it like 5?
Well, the matrix changes per the step of the deal, right?
Yep.
And so if we're saying in the initial, it's going to be in that 5 range. When we get to that second call, we're going 10 to 12.
Okay.
Right. So we're increasing as we get there, and then we're doing it there. But, your overall and your general in the beginning, it's that 5 criteria. But here's the thing, like if you're, potentially not the, founder, owner, CEO, right? And if you're acting, let's say, as like head of corp dev, you need to know from the top of the chain what's their criteria that's going to cut a deal, because we can like a deal as much as we can. We can think it's great. We can think it's great for the company. But at the end of the day, if they're not, the person that's financing is not in agreement with it, that has to be the number 1 criteria in it. Doesn't mean we have to say it off the bat to the potential target, but we need to know that.
Right. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I basically break my criteria into 2 sets. One is business criteria: revenue, gross margins, EBITDA, growth metrics, like kind of the basic set. It's fairly constrained. And then there's capability criteria. And it probably is worthy of a whole new episode of like how you do capability criteria, but there is capability criteria. And again, I tend to constrain it because it's like, if it's too complicated, then it gets really hard to like, if there's too many criteria on which you're measuring, it gets a little jiggery. So between 5 and 7 on the capability side, and I try to stay roughly the same on the business side. And I'm starting with the business and then working into capability, because for a sponsor-backed business, whether it's VC or whether it's PE, the end of the day, like you are either financing this either off of balance sheet or you're financing it off of debt or some combination. If the metrics aren't there, then the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. I think the capabilities definitely are like a plus, but if the business from a business criteria is like so way off, then it's hard to do anything, even if the criteria, the capability criteria is a fit.
Well, I also think then like there's this other piece that goes farther than that, and that's culture, like the cultural criteria. Absolutely. I think especially in like any type of services business, it is extremely important. The team that you're taking over.
You have you get a sense on the call. I have sort of a yes, no flag for culture, or I say high, low, like high fit, low fit. I also have a high, low fit for ICP. Ideally, I try to qualify ICP before the first phone call by looking at their website and seeing kind of customers that they service, but you can't always tell. It's not always super clear that that's the case. So, all right. So call
and your ISP, your ideal seller profile.
Your ideal seller profile, exactly. So call 2 is basically you're getting the financials. So from call 2, if you're green, the next step is you're going to do a data request and go.
Totally. We're going to start with that short form diligence list.
But we'll draw the rails around this episode and basically kind of keep it at call 1 and call 2, which is essentially in call 1, you are getting to know by basically learning all about them, probably getting a culture fit check as well, and making sure their expectations were in line. And then call 2 is getting a better sense of the business and seeing if the business criteria and the capability criteria, like depending on your priorities, there's a fitment between the two. I think the hard part about the job that we kind of skated over, which was like, there are booby traps that occur in the deal in the early stages of the process that you need to kind of suss out. So I thought we should just point out a couple of them. One is like, are you the ultimate decision maker if we decide to do something? There's like this thing of like co-founders and or silent partners and or financiers. I'm working on an opportunity right now where there's a silent partner who hasn't been in the business in a long time. And like sometimes those silent partners can have an outsized impact on whether or not you can get a deal done. Do you cover that? You try and get that out in the first call, or is that a second?
First call. Yeah. Who are the decision makers? Do you have any partners? Like, what's your relationship? And you're not going to get the real answer from what's your relationship on the first call. You'll get it more on the second call. But I want to know what the decision criteria is, but also, what does silent partner mean? What is the equity split? Do they have an operating agreement? What does that look like? Right. And so we really want to know, and sometimes you won't get this until you get some of the, that like initial due diligence list, and that diligence request. You're going to see like, what are the actual mechanics of, can I block a deal? But even some of the bigger parts on the second one are like, who are the key employees, right? Who are the key people within your business right now that like, I know the business can't live without at the moment, or that are really running this day to day of the business. And I want to know, what their personality would be like too. Now, keen they would be, to go to a new home to know if the business can survive without it.
What are one of your test questions for solving for the problem of, I notice a lot of agency founders or founders in general, we'll go universe versus one specific, are just kind of testing the waters. Like, what am I worth? Some actually, I think, like the idea of being courted. It's kind of an ego boost to be courted. So they kind of just engage because they like being courted. They want to see where it goes, but they may not be committed to actually engaging in a transaction. How do you solve for that?
Yeah. And this is something I'm trying to suss out early, because I don't like this. I mean, I get it, right? Everything is kind of like dating in a sense, but and this is something you and I have talked about in the past, and I talk about all the time, is like, dating is a psychological game, right? I need to know where they are in their head, right? Are they just dating to date because they're trying to have fun? They're trying to see like, can they boost their ego, or are they dating to, have a serious long-term commitment? Right. In a relationship, and are they looking for marriage? Right. Are you just looking for a life partner? Or are you looking to get married? Right. Those were always something I wanted to know when I was in the dating game, right, before I got married. And so it's the same type of questions, right? It's like, okay, well, what does your past look like? Have you gone through this process before? Have you right. Yeah. Have you gone through this process before? Have you had a long-term relationship before? Right. It's the same question. This doesn't relate to dating, but like, have you ever gotten a valuation before? Right. And if they've gotten a valuation before, if they've gone out and done this, well, then I know that they're actually getting serious about the process. They kind of understand what they're worth and their expectations. If I can tell that they're asking the questions just because they're trying to feel what they're worth and get courted, I start on my personality too. I go, listen, background in psychology, I kind of am a sharpshooter. I'm going to ask you some hard questions, some deep questions. If it gets too much for you, let me know. But let me know if this is okay with you. And that way I know I can dive into like those harder hitting questions to know if they're actually serious about this, to get them to like understand, is this just a courting game, or are we trying to get to a deal? And I say, and we move fast. And if you say we actually run a process, like we run an outreach process, we run an organic process, like we are doing this with multiple people because we're trying to get to an outcome, right? Then they know like, I'm not that special in like the nicest way possible, right? There are other people out there like me. Yeah. And therefore, like, it'll tell you, okay, are we getting somewhere or we're not?
Yeah. Interesting. When I started working in the agency world, I came from software. When I started working in the agency world, it wasn't really a qualifying question. Have you worked with a banker or have you talked to a banker? But I've noticed that bankers in the agency ecosystem, first of all, there are a lot of them. And second of all, they are super well networked. And so one of those questions is like, have you talked to or worked with a banker in the recent past? I find a lot of them have, and they've already kind of like, they have a sense of who they like. Do you handle anything differently if they answer an affirmatively, like, yeah, I'm talking to this firm or that firm, or I've talked to this firm, I stay in touch with them? Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't bother me. Right. I mean, like, I want to know who they're talking to. And I also want to know why, like, what do you like about them? Yeah. What do you not like about them? Like, and we can always say like, this is just like me being curious, right? And wanting to know, Are you going to engage one? Right? Like, and I always say, like, listen, you have to do what's best for you. Like, at the end of the day, a deal is met, like, when you feel like you get what you want and we get what we want to, right? Like, it has to work, just like in a marriage. So the way for you to get there has to, you can't feel shorted in any way. And I'm not going to suggest you don't do something.
Oh, sure.
But, I would love to know, and it's like me saying like what I would say to them, by the way.
I like, actually, I think that's great. I think, and the reason why I bring it up is, bankers deliver a lot of like value for us as well. They prepare a seller to sell. They usually kind of they have their house in better order if they've engaged with one. There is
fingers crossed that they do. You hope that they
fingers crossed, but usually they I find it's really partnered up. And bankers have also prepared them for set their expectations about, what is market. So they may not believe it or they may not like it, but bankers frequently are also doing the same qualification of like helping them understand what's market and where they need to get to. And I actually like having a banker around a deal if I feel like it's a smaller firm, it's a smaller business that kind of needs that help. You pay a little bit more for it, but I think you actually save a little bit of headache in the process. But you might think differently about it because, when you're doing a roll-up, you want to have a proprietary process. We have a little bit of advantage. And whereas if there's someone negotiating in the middle, you're always going to be in a tighter negotiation. What is your view on it?
Yeah, my view on it is that there are pros and cons always, right? The pros are exactly what you said. The cons are there is that middleman. And so rapport, especially in a deal, like rapport is strong, and rapport is something that you either have or you don't. And there's a point in time where rapport is broken. You can fix rapport, right? You can come back to, fix the rapport and build it back, but it's much harder when there's someone in the middle. And so the relationship, as you get farther into the deal process, it's really important to make sure that the buyer-seller relationship is there and continues, even with a middleman there. The other thing is a banker is incentivized for a certain outcome, right? They're compensated based off of the value in which they're getting, right? And the cash in which they're getting because of that. And so sometimes I actually love what they're building. If I'm the seller, right? Like I've started to like this. Now I'm at the end and I realize like, the cash on close might actually be a little bit smaller. Maybe the market's changed in the last 6 months, which we all know it has, right? But I still want to go there. But my banker is saying like, oh, no. Like it's not this, because they've spent so much now time and money on their part that they're trying to get to the end of the deal. And so you need to be aligned on like, you need to know what their incentive is, because sometimes the terms don't match up with what the right home might be. And you need to, the seller needs to decide for them, what's that breaking point? And the buyer needs to know.
I think the good point you raise is like, a lot of your right to win is the rapport building. And you have the benefit in a proprietary deal of being able to spend more time building rapport if it's something that you want to pursue. Whereas in a banker run process, there is a potential that you can be a little bit insulated, and that rapport building has to be more structured. Like you have to kind of work a little bit. I mean, I always find a little license in kind of working around, let's have coffee, let's chat, let's find a way to like build that relationship even in a banker process. And I think bankers, as long as you're not like blatantly going around them, they will give you a little room to do that, I find.
And a good banker wants you to do that.
Yeah, they do. They do. Absolutely. I mean, they want relationships there. They're doing a little gatekeeping, but they want the relationships there. Well, look, I think these are some great learnings. We could probably go on for another hour on this, but I think what we wanted to accomplish was that upfront sourcing process. How do you get to know quickly? How do you make sure that through the first 2 calls, you're quickly qualifying the opportunities, you're building rapport, you're really making sure that you're aligned so you don't spend time on opportunities that it's not the right time, the expectations are unreasonable, or it's just not really clear where you're going to get to the finish line. Even if you're aligned on some things, there's just not really a willingness to transact. And so I think you brought this real great idea of like leveraging sales background plus psychology, really targeted questioning, learning about the prospect. those are really great insights, and I appreciate you sharing them with the audience today. I think there's like so much more content you could cover here, but
I could go on for hours.
we could go on for hours, but this is really helpful. I really appreciate you joining us on the pod and sharing kind of your experience and how you got here. Is really, really cool.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And for all the listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do like, subscribe, and share. This is a wrap for episode 25. Until the next time, we'll see ya.